Let's get right into it. Number 10. Swinging a giant razor to harvest your bread. Imagine waking up at dawn, grabbing what's basically a 6-foot razor blade on a stick, and doing a deadly dance with it for 12 straight hours. That was just a normal Tuesday for people 200 years ago. We're talking about using a scythe. This was an art form that took years to master. One wrong move and you'd slice open your ankle instead of the wheat. A skilled person with a scythe could cut down an acre of grain in a single day. That's about the size of a football field. And they had to do this while moving in perfect rhythm. Step, swing, slice, step, swing, slice. It was like a deadly waltz with Mother Nature. They had to sharpen the blade every 15 minutes, not with a regular sharpening stone either. They'd carry a special whetstone and a cow horn filled with water strapped to their belt, and you couldn't just hack away at the grain like you're in a horror movie. The blade had to hit the stalks at exactly the right angle. Too high and you waste grain, too low and you dull your blade on dirt. People today can barely cut their lawns in straight lines with a powered mower. Back then, if your cutting pattern wasn't perfect, your family might not have enough bread to make it through winter. Number 9. Playing dinner or death with wild plants. Imagine you're walking through the woods, starving, and all you've got around you are plants. 200 years ago, this wouldn't be a problem. Your average person could look at a bunch of leaves and berries and instantly know what's dinner and what's death. These days, most of us can barely tell the difference between parsley and poison hemlock, and that's a mistake you only make once. Back then, kids were learning plant identification before they could even write their names. It wasn't some fancy hobby, it was survival. The average person in 1823 could identify over 100 edible plants in their local area. Today, most of us can name maybe 5, and that's counting the obvious stuff like apples. Take the common dandelion. Today we spray poison on it to keep our lawns pretty, but 200 years ago people would have thought we were insane. Every part of that plant is edible and nutritious. The roots can be roasted for coffee, the leaves make a great salad, and the flowers turn into wine. Our ancestors were basically walking around in an all-you-can-eat buffet while we're stepping on our food. They also had to know the deadly ones. Take water hemlock. Looks a lot like Queen Anne's lace, which is edible, but one bite of water hemlock and you're done for. It's so toxic that even touching it can make you sick. People back then had this knowledge burned into their brains. They had to. Their lives literally depended on it. Number 8. Digging a well without creating your own grave. 200 years ago, if you were thirsty and there was no water around, you'd have to dig a well yourself. These wells were deep, 30 to 50 feet straight down. That's like digging a hole as tall as 3 giraffes stacked on top of each other. You couldn't just dig straight down like a maniac. The walls would collapse faster than your motivation on a Monday morning. People used something called well lining. As they dug down, they'd build a stone or brick wall behind them, like building a tower, but in reverse and underground. They'd make a stone ring slightly bigger than the hole they wanted. Then they'd dig under it, letting the ring slowly sink down as they dug deeper. It's like playing the world's most dangerous game of Jenga, except you're digging your way to the bottom, and if you lose, you get buried alive. Sometimes they'd hit pockets of bad air down there. Carbon dioxide would build up at the bottom of these wells like an invisible death trap. Their solution was to lower a candle down there first. If it went out, you just saved yourself from becoming a well-preserved corpse. And you had to do all this while standing in a 3-foot wide hole. That's less space than you have in an airplane bathroom. At least in an airplane bathroom, you're not worried about the walls caving in. Number 7. Putting your fire to bed so you don't freeze. Imagine waking up tomorrow and your phone's dead, your power's out, and it's freezing cold. You'd curse, bundle up, and wait for things to get fixed. But 200 years ago, people had a solution to this problem. They put their fires to bed. Every night, they'd literally tuck their fires in like a toddler. Before going to bed, you'd carefully bury the hot coals in a thick blanket of ash. It's kind of like wrapping a baked potato in foil. The ash keeps the heat in and lets the coals breathe just enough to stay alive. The next morning, you'd wake up to find a live ember waiting for you, like a faithful pet. Without this skill, you'd have to start a fire from scratch every morning. Trying to start a fire when your fingers are numb from cold is about as fun as trying to text with frozen fingers. The difference is, you might freeze to death. People got so good at this that they could keep the same fire going for months or even years. That's longer than most Netflix subscriptions last. Some families even pass down their fires through generations, like a really warm family heirloom. Today, we can't even keep a houseplant alive for more than a week. But back then, letting your fire die out wasn't just inconvenient, it could be deadly. Number 6. Turning a dead animal's skin into your coat. Imagine you're freezing cold, and instead of ordering a coat on Amazon, you have to make one from scratch. And by scratch, I mean you're staring at a dead deer wondering how to turn it into something wearable. For your great-great-grandparents, this wasn't some weird hobby. It was just Tuesday. First, you'd have to scrape all the flesh and fat off the hide. Imagine peeling a really stubborn sticker off. except the sticker is rotting meat and there's a lot more of it. You had to get every last bit, because any spot you missed would rot, smell like death, and attract every predator for miles. Once the hide was clean, you had to tan it with the animal's own brain. Our ancestors were basically zombie chefs, mashing the brain into a paste to rub into their future clothes. The natives had a saying, "Every animal has enough brains to tan its own hide." It's like nature's perfect recycling system. The brain's natural oils would break down the hide's fibers, making it soft and wearable. After the brain bath, you'd spend hours stretching and pulling the hide as it dried. Skip this step, and your nice soft leather turns into something with the flexibility of plywood. The whole process took days, smelled worse than a garbage dump on a hot day, and you couldn't just quit because you were grossed out. No jacket meant you might freeze to death. Number 5. Frankenstein-ing a tree for better fruit. So imagine you're living in 1823 and you want some good apples. You can't just go to Walmart and grab a bag of Honeycrisps, and you definitely can't just plant an apple seed and hope for the best, because apple seeds are like lottery tickets. Plant one from even the tastiest apple, and you'll probably get a tree that makes fruit so sour it'll turn your face inside out. This is where tree grafting comes in, and pretty much everyone knew how to do it. Think of it like tree surgery, but way more Frankenstein. You'd take a branch from a tree that makes good fruit and basically stitch it onto another tree. First, you'd make a clean cut on your base tree, kind of like giving it a flat top haircut. Then, you'd slice a branch from your good tree at an angle, like sharpening a pencil. Now here's where it gets weird. You'd jam these two parts together and wrap them up tight. If you did it right, these two different trees would literally grow into one tree. The bottom part would be like, "Hey, I'll handle the roots and water," while the top part's like, "Cool, I'll make the good apples." But timing was everything. Do it at the wrong time of year, and you get a dead tree. Cut at the wrong angle, and you get a dead tree. Wrap it too loose, and you get a dead tree. People back then could do this in their sleep. Today, most of us can barely keep a cactus alive. Number 4. Spinning fluff into usable thread. You need new socks. Today, you'd just hop over to the store and grab a pack. But 200 years ago, you'd have to make them yourself, starting with the actual thread. And I don't mean buying thread from the craft store. I mean taking actual fluffy wool or cotton and turning it into something you can sew with. This was such a basic skill that even kids knew how to do it. You'd take your raw wool or cotton and start twisting it. But you couldn't just twist it with your fingers. That would take forever and the thread would be lumpy. You needed a drop spindle, which is basically a stick with a weight on the end. The spindle would hang down and spin like a top while you fed the fluff into it. The spinning motion would pull the fibers together and twist them into a strong thread. It sounds simple, but it took years to master. Today, most people would have better luck trying to juggle chainsaws than make usable thread from scratch. People back then could spin thread so fine you could barely see it. We're talking thread thinner than human hair. They made muslins so fine they were called woven air. These fabrics were so thin, a whole dress could be pulled through a wedding ring. And here we are today, struggling to thread a needle we bought from the store. Number 3. Interpreting shadows cast by a stick in the ground. You're transported back 200 years, and someone steals your phone. You'll just check your watch then. Nope, that's gone too. So how do you know what time it is? When to meet your friends? When to start cooking dinner? Your great-great-great-grandparents would just grab a stick, stick it in the ground, and read the time. People back then could tell time just by looking at shadows. They'd plant a stick in the ground. They called it a gnomon. The shadow would tell them everything. The shadow would make a different arc every day. Shortest at noon, longest at sunrise and sunset. In summer, the noon shadow would be tiny. In winter, even at noon, it'd stretch out like a lazy cat. They could read this shadow clock in their sleep. Kids learned it like we learned to read emoji. A typical farmer from that era could tell time more accurately with a stick than most of us can with a $500 watch. They could tell direction without a compass. Find true north just by marking where the shadow points at noon. East and west just mark the shadow at sunrise and sunset. Today, most of us can barely tell time on an analog clock. We've got GPS in our pockets but get lost the second our phone dies. Your ancestors could navigate an entire continent with nothing but a stick in the ground. Number 2. Building a weather-resistant haystack. Imagine messing up at work so badly that an entire village starves to death. That's exactly what could happen if you were bad at building haystacks 200 years ago. See, hay wasn't just some pile of dead grass back then. It was literally the difference between life and death during winter. If your animals didn't have hay to eat, they'd die. And if your animals died, you had no meat, no milk, and no way to plow your fields come spring. Building a proper haystack was like playing agricultural Jenga. Each layer had to be placed just right, with the stems pointing slightly downward and outward. This created a natural roof that would shed water like tiny shingles. Get it wrong, and rain would seep in, turning your precious hay into a giant moldy mess. You couldn't just fix it later. Once moisture got in, the hay would start heating up from the inside. Sometimes it would get so hot, it would literally burst into flames. Imagine explaining that to your neighbors. Sorry guys, my hay pile just exploded. Number 1. Negotiating a price without a price tag. Imagine walking into a store where nothing has a price tag, not a single item. That's how every shop worked 200 years ago. You'd walk in wanting to buy some flour, and instead of grabbing a bag with a neat little price sticker, you'd have to do this weird dance with the shopkeeper. You'd pick up the flour, look at it really carefully like you're some kind of flour expert, maybe sniff it a bit, and then casually ask how much. The shopkeeper would name a price that was probably twice what they actually wanted. Then you'd gasp dramatically, maybe clutch your chest and say something like, 2 shillings for this? My grandmother's cousin's neighbor sells it for half that. And the dance would begin. Here's the crazy part. People back then could instantly tell if they were getting ripped off. They knew the rough value of everything, from a sack of potatoes to a new pair of boots. Their survival depended on it. The really wild part is this skill wasn't just about saving money, it was about respect. If you were bad at negotiating, people would actually look down on you. It was like being bad at texting in today's world. Socially embarrassing. So next time you're grateful for price tags, remember we lost something when we gained them. We lost the ability to look someone in the eye and challenge them about overcharging for carrots. That's all for today. I'll be making similar videos in the future. Subscribe to see them.